Hello, welcome to International Business. This is Chapter 1 called Globalization. Our learning objectives today, we're going to understand what is meant by the term globalization, and we're also going to recognize the main drivers of what globalization is all about. And we're going to describe the changing nature of the global economy. We're also going to explain the main arguments in the debate over the impact of globalization. And we're going to understand how the process of globalization is creating opportunities and challenges for management practice. Definition. What is globalization? The globalization of markets, the merging of historically distinct and separate national markets into one huge global marketplace. Falling barriers to cross-border trade and investment, global tastes, benefits small and large companies, sufficient or significant differences between national markets, and products that serve universal needs are global, such as oil, and competitors may not change among nations. What's interesting today is what we're seeing is with the new Trump administration, the word tariffs. And what's happening, the United States is reviewing all its bilateral trade agreements. And if there is no reciprocity, meaning if the United States is being charged tariffs and then we're not charging another country tariffs, that's going to change. There's going to be an equivalence. If we're being charged tariffs to go into another market, then those countries are going to be charged as well. The purpose of this is really to irritate and annoy the existing business partners, but recognize that these trade deals are not fair and then come up with something that has some type of equivalence. And that's what's going to happen. But there may be some disruptions, there may be some difficulties before these objectives can be achieved. Sourcing goods to take advantage of differences in cost and quality of factors of production. And this is where the globalization of production takes place, because just as production goes to those places where the costs are lower, it's going to cost a lot less if those people in those countries earning less money per year or hour, and also if those products cost less to produce in those countries because maybe they're mined there or produced there or harvested or whatever the factors of production are. Early outsourcing was confined just to manufacturing, but with modern communications technology, that has advanced outsourcing today for all service activities. Robert Reich, he's the former Secretary of Labor, suggests global products. The impediments prevent optimal dispersion of activities. There's formal and informal barriers to trade. There's also barriers to foreign direct investment. There's transportation costs. There's also political and economic risk, and the challenge of coordinating globally dispersed supply chains. You have to be pretty cognizant of what's going on in a lot of different areas around the world in order to anticipate what type of disruptions could possibly happen for your supply chain. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw the difficulties that many companies encountered when there were problems in the supply chain. And then we have the emergence of global institutions. Institutions needed to help manage, regulate, and police the global marketplace. You've got the GATT, the WTO, and the IMF, and the UN, and the WTF. No, I'm just kidding. There's no WTF here. It's the World Bank. And these are organizations here that have been comprised together so that they can help countries. Suppose a country has a dispute with tariffs or something like that, or one country may feel another country is dumping the product into their country. Well, these are the organizations that you would go to handle these kind of trade disputes. The WTO, it polices the world trading system and ensures nation states adhere to the rules of engagement. It also facilitates multinational agreements among members. And as of 2021, 164 nations that account for 98% of world trade were WTO members. Then you have the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund. It's established in order to maintain the international monetary system. It's often seen as the lender of last resort, and in return for loans, It requires nation states to adopt specific economic policies aimed at returning their economies to stability and growth. The World Bank, it promotes economic development, and it's focused on making low-interest loans to cash-strapped governments in poor nations that wish to undertake significant infrastructure investment. The UN is a useless internet. No, sorry, that's not what it says. The UN promotes peace through international cooperation and collective security. There's currently 193 members, and the UN Charter has 4 basic purposes. Purpose number 1, maintain international peace and security. Number 2, develop friendly relations among nations. Number 3, cooperate in solving international problems and in promoting respect for human rights. And the last one, be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations. The Group of 20, or G20, it comprises finance ministers and central bank governors of the 19 largest economies in the world, plus representatives from the European Union and the European Central Bank. It represents 90% of global GDP and 80% of international global trade. The drivers of globalization. Well, you've got declining trade and investment barriers. So between the 1920s and 1930s, many barriers to international trade and foreign direct investment. International trade, when a firm exports goods or services to consumers in another country. FDI, or foreign direct investment, is when a firm invests resources in business activities outside of its home country. Then you have GATT. GATT lowered barriers. Uruguay round extended GATT and established WTO. Not to be confused with WTF. The drivers of globalization continues. Between 1960 and 2020, the value of the world economy increased 9 times, while the value of international goods increased almost 20 times. Trade in goods and services and the value of foreign direct investment have all been growing faster than world output. More firms dispersing production process to different locations around the world. Economies of the world's nation states are becoming much more intertwined and interdependent, and the world has become significantly wealthier in the past 2 decades. The value of world merchandise trade and world production from 1960 to 2021, and we can see the growth. Communications is also important and a driver of technological change. Development of the microprocessor, single most important innovation since World War II. Moore's law predicts that the power of microprocessor technologies doubles and its cost of production falls in half every 18 months. Then we have the internet. More than half of the world's population uses it, and global e-commerce sales are close to $4 trillion. The internet also acts as an equalizer. Continuing with technological change, we have transportation technology. Commercial jets, super freighters, and containerization have all shrunk the globe. Implications for the globalization of production. Locating production in geographically separate locations has become more economical. Implications for the globalization of markets. Cultural distance has been reduced and has brought some convergence of consumer tastes and preferences. The changing demographics of the global economy. In 1960s, the U.S. accounted for 38.3% of world output. By 2020, the U.S. accounted for 24.7% of world output. This reflects the faster economic growth of several other economies, particularly China. China and BRIC countries are growing more rapidly, and BRIC stands for... That's correct, very good. Developing nations may account for more than 60% of world economic activity by 2030, but we'll see if that happens. As barriers to the free flow of goods and services fell, non-U.S. firms increasingly invested across national borders. Desire to disperse production activities to optimal locations and to build a direct presence in major foreign markets. Outward stock of foreign direct investment, the total cumulative value of foreign investments by firms domiciled in nations outside of that nation's borders. FDI outward as a percentage of GDP. We can take a look here. Let's take a look at the United States. In 1995, looks like it was 17. And then in 2005, 28. And then by 2025, you're looking at just under 40%. FDI inflows in millions of dollars. You can see that it's been increasing and increasing, but also developing economies that seem to be getting into the act at a much higher percentage. The changing nature of the multinational enterprise, or M&E, is any business that has productive activities in two or more countries. Non-U.S. multinationals in 2003, 38.3% of the world's 2,000 largest multinationals were U.S. firms. By 2019, 28.8% of the top 2,000 global firms were U.S. multinationals, a drop of 201 firms. Here's national share of the largest 2,000 multinational corporations. You can see the United States has the largest share with 29%, followed by China with 15 and Japan with 11. I don't know, let's see Russia here. It's moving forward. The changing nature of the multinational enterprise continued. We have the rise of the multinationals. Some of these multinationals have a stock market valuation that is more than the GDP of some nations. Growth in the number of medium and small-sized businesses. Internet is lowering barriers that smaller firms faced in international trade. In the changing world order, former communist countries present export and investment opportunities. Signs of growing unrest, and commitment to market-based economic systems cannot be assumed. Risk of doing business in these countries is very high. China is moving to become an industrial superpower. And in Latin America, debt and inflation are down, but there are more private investors and expanding economies. The global economy of the 21st century. Barriers to the free flow of goods, services, and capital have been coming down, strengthened by the widespread adoption of liberal economic policies by countries that had opposed them. Globalization is not inevitable. Countries may pull back, and risks are high. The globalization debate. Anti-globalization protests began with 1999 protests at WTO meeting in Seattle. Protesters now typically show up at major meetings of global institutions. Protesters believe globalization causes detrimental effects on living standards, wage rates, and the environment. Theory and evidence suggest these fears may be exaggerated, although they do have credence. Globalization, jobs, and income. Critics of globalization argue, number one, falling trade barriers allow firms to move manufacturing activities to countries where wage rates are much lower. It's destroyed manufacturing jobs in wealthy, advanced economies. And this is where you get a lot of the pushback from globalization, because in the Midwest, for years, that is where the basket of manufacturing was, and then many of these companies decided to leave and go overseas and produce these products significantly cheaper because of the labor costs. And what happened to these jobs? Many of these people in these high-paying jobs were not able to find other jobs, and hence protesting of globalization. Services are also being outsourced, contributing to higher unemployment and lower living standards in their home nations. Not good. Benefit to outweigh the costs, supporters argue, and free trade will result in countries specializing in the production of goods and services that they can produce most efficiently, while importing goods and services that they cannot produce as sufficiently. As a result, the whole economy is better off. Companies can reduce their cost structure and consumers benefit. Data suggests the share of labor in national income has declined over the past 2 decades. The share of national income by skilled labor has increased. Unskilled labor experienced a fall in income, but not necessarily standard of living, due to economic growth. The weak growth rate in real rates for unskilled workers is likely due to a technology-induced shift within advanced economies. Technological change has a bigger impact than globalization on declining share of national income enjoyed by labor. Critics argue labor and environmental regulations increase manufacturing costs. Lack of regulation can lead to abuse. Firms move production to nations that do not have regulations. Supporters argue tougher environmental regulations and stricter labor standards go hand in hand with economic progress. Free trade leads to less labor exploitation and less pollution. Income levels and environmental pollution. Globalization and national sovereignty. Critics argue the shift of power away from national governments towards supranational organizations like the WTO, the EU, and the UN. Supporters argue the power of supranational organization is limited to what nation states collectively agree to grant. These organizations exist to serve the collective interests of member states. Critics argue the gap between the rich and poor nations has gotten wider, but has been due to totalitarian government, poor economic policies, corruption and lack of property rights, expanding populations in developing countries, and also debt burdens. Supporters suggest lowering barriers to trade and investment and promoting free market policies. Here's a chart on the percentage of the world's population living in poverty during 1981 to 2015. So poverty headcount ratio at $1.90 a day. We can take a look at this. It used to be 40% of the population in 1981, and now it's only 10% in 2015. And then we can see the poverty headcount ratio at 550 a day, and you can see how it's declined precipitously into 2015. Managing international business. Any firm that engages in international trade or investment is international. Managing international business differs from managing purely domestic businesses. Why? Well, countries are different. The range of problems is wider, and the problems are significantly more complex. And that those individuals who own these businesses or work in them must find ways to work within limits imposed by the government. The range of problems is wider, and the problems are more complex. Transactions involving converting money into different currencies. And some countries do not allow you to repatriate the profits, so you have to leave the profits in that home country and invest them to make sure that you're getting a good return. I thank you for listening. Have a great day.